Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Lawson, are you ready for today's content?
Yeah.
Wow. Awesome. Well, then let's just get started. Welcome, dads. We're glad you're here. Lawson was just commenting that in the last few days, he received his copy of our new book, Bring Your Hammer, written by yours truly and Eric Ballard. And what was interesting about your comment, Lawson, is you didn't really say anything about the quality of the book contents, or you didn't even comment on like how good looking my picture was on the back or Eric's picture. Instead, you chose to focus on something other than the actual book.
Yeah, I thought the packaging was really good. It came in a cool box.
There you have it, folks. There you have it, Dad. Listen, if you order a copy of Bring Your Hammer, we cannot attest to the quality of the book contents whatsoever. However, you're going to love the packaging.
Would it actually hurt? Would it hurt you if I went on Amazon and left a review that just said, good packaging, the box was cool, the box was sleek, but give it 5 stars?
As they say, sticks and stones will break my bones, but stupid reviews from Lawson will never hurt me.
I don't want to hurt you, but I do think it would be funny.
No, go right ahead. Go right ahead. If you're out there and you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, gee, I too would like to leave a Smart Aleck review on Amazon. We're good. We're good. We're covered in the Smart Aleck category. We are fully covered. Lawson has us completely covered. Today, we're talking about, from the book, Bring Your Hammer, chapter 9. And that chapter 9 is about a godly dad risking his comfort to pursue his calling. And we're going to kind of kick this around a little bit. I'm going to start, Lawson, at a place where I think a lot of dads, well, let me say it for just biographically, from my perspective. I remember when April, my wife, first became pregnant with our oldest son, Alex, who's now will turn 22 later this year. I don't know why I care about when he'll turn 22. Okay, he's 21. Or is he 22? What year are we in? 22? Well, he'll turn 23. And I remember when he was first born, for whatever reason, and I know this is not totally true for a lot of dads, but for whatever reason, a blessing I was given fairly early is I never had that moment where I had like deep resentment that my life had now been intercepted by this child. Like, I know it's a natural thing to kind of be going a certain direction in life, and you've got commitments, right? Whether those commitments are work related or fun related, or my wife and I used to travel all the time together because it was just the two of us and there were no kid obligations. But I remember once Alex came along, we kind of settled into, all right, this is our new normal. Now, there's been a lot of moments where, yeah, sleepless nights and all that. And my wife was completely ate up with kid duties for a long time. And I remember thinking, wow, we don't have a lot of time to ourselves. But even going back, if a dad's listening to this podcast, one of the things he's already had to do is kick out the door some of his own comforts to accept the call of being a dad, because it does impact your life. Can you remember back when you and Audrey were having your daughters and the daughters were coming along and you were a busy professional picking it up and putting it down in the work world? How did your mindset shift once you went from just the two of you to now there's this young baby in the mix and your life was changing dramatically?
Yeah, it's like there's no good time to have a baby, but there's always the right time to have the baby. Like, you know, you're not going to wait around and find the perfect spot. I mean, the perfect spot and time in your life. For us, I was on a new team for GE putting appliances in Home Depot stores. So this was way back when, before Depot.
Like physically, you were driving the forklift truck?
No, but physically we were going to hundreds of Home Depot stores, flying all over the country and, you know, spreading the program and all that. So it was a lot. And then on weekends, on 2 weekends a month, I was going back to school. And then we had our first, Abigail. So it was just like it's a blacked out time in my life because it was no sleep, tons of travel, a lot of, it's like you just couldn't pile anything else on. But it was also really cool and really good. But so, yeah, so the comfort level was non-existent for that, a year at least, a couple of years maybe. I was wondering, when you and Eric are putting this book together and you get to this spot and you've decided that the chapter name is The Godly Dad Risks Comfort to Pursue Calling, I wondered a couple things. Talking about comfort, not necessarily is it physical comfort. It can be to some degree, but it was probably emotional comfort, get uncomfortable with things that you haven't dealt with before, probably some faith discomfort, going into a place where I remember Bob Russell had a saying that faith is going to the edge of all the light that you have and then taking one more step. And I thought, like, what else? So it's physical, emotional, spiritual discomfort. But then I also keyed in and circled the word risks. And so I'm just curious. I know Eric wrote this chapter, but I'm curious. I'm sure you guys talked some. And I've got a story about a dad that's doing something that I wrote in my notes here. But first, I want to hear from you on, so why did you insert the word risk? And then is that it, right? Emotional comfort, physical, spiritual. Explain that.
Yeah. And I would say the other one that might be in physical would be financial. And the reason that we wanted to use that kind of turn of phrase is I remember having lunch one time with a gentleman in London, England. And he was really, really savvy, smart, very advanced in the ministry life. Like he had been at the ministry life 25 years and I was just starting out. And his name's Rob. And Rob said to me, he goes, "Hey man," really cool British guy. And he goes, "So, you and your wife have a house?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "2 cars?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Picket fence, American dream." And we kind of laughed. And I said, "I mean, yeah, like we're like 3-bedroom house, mid suburbia kind of thing." And he goes, "Have you looked through scripture about what happened financially to most of the people who chose to follow the call God put in their life?" And there was this like kind of pause over our pea soup and Cokes at the London Hilton. And I looked at him and I go, "I can scroll through some in my head right now." And he goes, "Well, I'm not saying God is going to decimate you financially because you chose to follow his plan for your life. However, what I am going to say is he ain't guaranteeing you're going to be better off either." He goes, "And most of the people who followed God's will in scripture, it wasn't a financial win for them." And so he was just talking about that one topic, finances, and he was making a very compelling point. And he goes, "Look, all I'm saying is you need to be prepared to hold those kinds of things really loosely in the future." And so I remember that, and not that everybody should go into nonprofit work or everybody should go become a missionary, but yeah, I think it's important that if we tie God's calling to a must-have financial upside, that may or may not be the case. And so I would just add financial, and I would say that that's the willingness. To the point you made a minute ago about Bob's thing is going to the edge of what you know and taking one more step. I didn't know if this would work out well for us financially or okay, or if we keep the house or keep the cars. God's been really faithful and opened some doors for us and blessed us. So we're fine. But at the end of the day, for me, the risk is I just don't know the future. I don't know the future. And so Nehemiah was going to leave this thing he knew very well and go back into this thing that who knows what's going to go on there. And that's the kind of risk that we're talking about. Tell me about your friend.
I will. It doesn't have all that much to do with this, except that I love the way
we have a topic here, Lawson, right? We have like a topic today. Like we're going to try like be on the topic. It's okay. Whatever. No, you just talk about whatever you want. I mean, it's labor strikes, food shortage. What do you want to talk about?
Are you done? So what I love where Nehemiah says, he just goes, "So I went." That is so succinct and straightforward, but in the context of what that meant, what he was about to do, where he was going to embark on, the task at hand, this huge rebuilding of a major city at the time, for him to just simply go, so I left. I got a kick out of that, but it made me think of, as we're recording this, Russia is bombing everywhere in Ukraine, and it's just this horrible thing to watch on TV. And I'm also getting peppered by some guys that are, we serve together, or others that when they left the service and went into like some sort of paramilitary or security background or something like that. That happens a lot. So I'm just getting texts and also seeing articles where veterans are volunteering and going over there for some degree of something. And so I've been having these, especially with a couple, 2 or 3 guys, like some real heart to hearts about, I've decided that it's just, I can't do it. I'm not going to do what Nehemiah said and say, so I went, for a number of reasons. But one of my buddies is, and he is really well equipped. He partly speaks the language. He is an artillery expert. He could get in there and do some good training, of the Ukrainian forces. And we talked several different times. And then what's today? Friday. A few days ago, I got a text from him that just said, I'm going. So I don't know if he's there now or packing up or what. I'm going to call him, later today and just check in. And I wonder if I'll get him. But that is a real risk. And this guy's a dad. His family has known him for 30 years as a Marine officer. And he took a couple of battalions to Afghanistan 2 different times. So, they know their dad as this warrior. They've also seen him fight for them. I don't mean physical fighting. I'm saying like fight for their faith and fight for their well-being. And I look up to him a lot. And my heart dropped when I got that one word similar to Nehemiah. And so he's back then, Nehemiah is inscribing, or he's saying that to someone. And it's like, it does make you think, like, you did something similar, Kent. You had good job, good career path, and then God put it on your heart. You and April had, I know, multiple conversations and prayer and thought and counseling from people. And then at some point you said, we're going, here we go. And you had to go give your notice, and you had to put together there were real things back then. It's not just, you just didn't all of a sudden appear. And Manhood Journey is this strong, standing, solid foundation, great board, good mission, doing a lot of good work. It took a lot. God was with you. You had ups and downs. And so all that kind of tying together made me really appreciate that when there are times in our lives where whatever the calling may be, it doesn't have to be going to a foreign country to fight. Obviously, it doesn't need to be go start a ministry. It is also little things in our day-to-day that compel a dad. I'll tell you this, it might be more scary for me to have to move into something that my child is, if one of them were really deeply struggling with some faith matter, or, like something that is deeply troubling them. And I know there are a lot of dads out there that have that on their hands. I don't know that I would rather pack up a pack and fly to Poland, and try to figure out how to help train some guys how to fight or shoot their weapons, than going into a spiritual battle that my child is going through. That is equally as daunting and scary. And I would say there's more on the line.
Hey, Dad, every week it can seem like you're climbing a mountain. You have things to do, and Manhood Journey and Father on Purpose are here to help you climb that mountain with a free weekly newsletter we call Mountain Monday. What it is it is a short, bite-sized reminder every Monday of important things. We walk through some scripture together. We throw out our recent blog post. We throw you some quotes. We give you a challenge. This Monday morning newsletter is free, totally free, and you can sign up today at manhoodjourney.org. Come to manhoodjourney.org and sign up for Mountain Monday, and every Monday morning, get some encouragement for your fatherhood journey. Well, It's interesting you say that. For a lot of dads, I mean, for the vast majority of us, we're not going to be asked to be martyred for our faith. We're not going to be asked to physically move out of the country like your friend who's going to help in a wartime scenario. For the vast majority of us, it's highly likely that we will not be asked to do those things. Having said that, you mentioned there are those daily acts of courage that dads are asked to make. We're asked to step into spiritual battle for our children. We're asked to engage in conversations with our kids about difficult topics. We're asked to be honest, but also be loving. There are things that we need to do. And I would argue that a dad might have any, couple to 20 miniature, courageous kind of moments in a day that are uncomfortable. There are things that you're asked to do. And so as a dad's driving down the road, if you're listening to the podcast, I want to ask a question, and I want to let it kind of roll around in the minds of a dad listening. What makes you uncomfortable? What makes you uncomfortable? I will tell you that there's a couple coffee shops in Louisville that I frequent, and I'm used to the staff. I'm used to the kind of clientele. I kind of know, I see some of the same people. And just this week, there has been a person who's come in to the coffee shop, and you can tell by the clothing and what this person's carrying, it would appear that they're either homeless or they don't have a lot of possessions, one way or the other. And the person seems very, very withdrawn and almost like super nervous. And even the way they sit at the coffee shop is like kind of away from everybody. And you can tell they want to be left alone. And that makes me uncomfortable. That makes me uncomfortable. And what I want to do is I want to go sit down straight across from this person and just go, "Hey, how you doing? How are you doing?" I'm afraid to. I don't want to. It's not nearly as dangerous as your friend who's, hopping a flight to somewhere in Europe. But for most of us dads, that's the daily or weekly or monthly act of courage or uncomfortability that we might need to step into. So right now you may have a conversation with your wife that you think is uncomfortable, that you don't want to have, or there's a conversation with your children that you want to bring up and you don't want to have. And so I'd love to give a dad, just a quick aside. I mean, it's on the topic, but this is like your practical tool tip for the day. Dad, if you're listening to this, here's your practical tool tip. If you want to have a conversation with someone and you believe the conversation is uncomfortable for you, state that right at the beginning. It's amazing how disarming it is. So if I got to call Lawson and talk to him about what a rotten co-host he is on our show, I would just say, "Hey, Lawson, man, I need to talk to you about something. And for me, it's really uncomfortable." And then instantly this human kind of like need kicks in where you're going to try to help me. It's like a person stranded on the side of the road and they're fixing their tire. You don't feel this sense of like dread or fear. You're like, I could pull over and help that. Like, people want to help people. And so if I just ask you for help, if I just go, "Hey man, I need to talk to you about something," and I got to be honest, for me, it's uncomfortable. It's amazing how easily that conversation begins with your teenage kid. If you want to talk about something, cultural or sexual, or, guys tend to be afraid of the talk about sex with their kids or whatever. And you just go, "Hey man, I want to talk to you about something." And it can be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think that's a super good tip. I totally agree with you. It could be a conversation you want to have with your wife or a buddy of yours that you need to share something with, not that he's doing, but that's something that you want to work on, or some mistake you made and you want to get some advice, and that's not comfortable. You are risking discomfort by going into some situation like that. Something else is, here in the book, it says, before we can ever reach anything God has called us to, we first have to decide to go. And so I think there's something critical about, as a dad, there are times where something may come up and it just naturally flows out. It feels great. It feels, like kind of God ordained conversation happens and the moment was right. And you're very thankful that God showed up in that moment and helped you handle something. But then there's other times where, you need to put a little thought into it. You need to put some plan together. I think there are in our lives, there are opportunities to just kind of gloss over something or ignore it, and everybody's busy and it just doesn't feel like there's, the right time. And so next thing you know, it's now the next day and still hasn't been addressed. And then it's this time next week. And before you know it, it's 3 weeks later. I think there's another practical tip that I think has been helpful. And I've seen some guys do it, and I want to model it in my own life. And I have to some degree, but I could do more of it. And that is creating time and environment for things that you are doing with your children, with your wives. And that means sometimes like no agenda. You're just going to make a daddy-daughter walk, go for a long walk together. And it could be a father-son going out and grabbing a bite, but not to go talk about baseball or what may be coming up with school or something like that, but to ask them how they're doing on something, and then being quiet and listening. And I know in one of the other episodes, we're going to talk about discernment and listening. So I don't want to go into it too much.
I'm sorry. I got distracted. What were you saying?
Right.
Huh? Start over.
I know who I'm dealing with. I know who I'm dealing with here, and I can see your face. You're drifting off. But you know what I'm saying? Like, you've got to put some effort into it. And that is something that I think I want to design that time better.
We did something recently in Manhood Journey, and I would chalk it up to being fairly much just kind of a failure. Like, it didn't go well. It was not well received. And it's not the book, Bring Your Hammer, by the way. Actually, hey, on that point, the first week of the book launch, we had more sales of a book in a week than we've ever had in the past. So we'll see if that works. Like, we'll see if guys give us feedback where the book is valuable. It's one thing to get them to like actually receive the book. It's another thing to get them to enjoy it. So we'll see if it actually, how it works. But all that to say, the same week, roughly, where that was a good high water mark, there's another thing we tried that was like total failure. I would just say nothing about it went the way it probably should have. And what's really interesting is, I think for a lot of dads, they continue to operate in that zone of comfort accidentally. It's not like you could go stop in their house at 2 p.m. and go, "Hey man, are you in your comfort zone?" I don't think they wake up every morning and go, "Okay, I see the edges of my comfort zone. I'm going to make sure I stay in it." But what we do is though, we do tend to stay in those things. So like, let me ask Dad, when's the last time you did something where you can honestly say you either did something you've never done before, like it's first time, or you did something and you failed? And if you can't pull either one of those out in your recent memory, like last few months, you're probably spending a lot of time in your comfort zone. You're doing the same things at work. Like, you kind of know your job. You're doing the same things with your wife. You kind of know what's in bounds. You're doing the same things with your kids. And I'm not saying it's broken, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm not saying just go start doing. What I am saying is, if I look back on my manhood journey, the last 5 or 6 years of being kind of full time in the ministry, I'll bet you I stepped into an environment where I knew 30%. Here's what's funny. I thought I knew 80% of what I needed to know. I have discovered I actually knew about 30%. But what was cool was along the way, right? I had people like you who affirmed us by encouraging me and even donating to help us get off the ground. I had my wife who was on board from the jump, man. She was excited about doing this. I had other people who donated time and energy and advice. And so I felt almost pulled in. I don't feel like I took some big leap of faith. I feel like I was pulled in like the Death Star tractor beam. That's a bad example, I guess, to use with like God's will is like the Death Star. But I was pulled in to this as just like one step after the other. And so what I would love to encourage dads to do is, hey man, what seems uncomfortable and how much have you bumped into in the last month or two? And if it's not enough, man, let's go stir the comfort waters a bit.
Yeah, I love that. There's a guy on my team that a couple of years ago, an opportunity came up. We were within the business doing some different things. And he had an opportunity to take what I thought at the time was a great promotion. And it would have meant a few things that he would have had to do differently in his life, namely some travel. And he was just not at the right time. And he turned this promotion down, which was a risk for him. Fast forward now 2 years later, now is the time that he then now has taken that job. And it's 2 years have passed and it's such a better time. And he told me back then, he was like, look, I've just got some family priorities and things happening within my children's lives that I just can't take that on right now. And I hope it won't be held against me. And, I'm going to keep doing my good job at doing what I'm doing right now. And dude, it worked out so great. And because of that decision, he and I have had conversations outside of work about faith and about family that have really done us both good. And then now we're able to see, and it's really cool how I appreciate that God puts cherries on top sometimes and makes it so vivid, where you're like, God, that's exactly why it had to wait for now. And so that was a risk. And he was unwilling at the time. He discerned that was not the right time for him to take that. It would have been good monetarily and career-wise and all that, but now it's so much better.
Well, and did he make a lot more money in the new gig?
He will.
Yeah. So does he want to donate to Manhood Journey?
He knows about it now.
Oh, sweet. If you're out there listening, here's our address. What's interesting about what you just caused a block to fall into my head into place, like the old Tetris game. Sometimes we think of comfort as like we're on a level, so to speak, and we're going to go down. It's like I make $100,000 or whatever I make, and I'm going to go down to 60 to take that new job, and I'm risking all my comforts, all my pleasures of life, so to speak. But in your friend's case, it's a little bit like the inverse. He was willing to risk not grabbing the next thing up, so to speak, from a economic and responsibility standpoint, because the timing just didn't seem right. So sometimes staying where we are could be the most courageous choice we can make and not getting pulled in to a new gig. I remember finally getting a job, Lawson, about 5-6 years ago. No, I was supposed to be 7 or 8 years ago. And I finally got a job where for the very first time, I desperately did not want my boss's job. Like for the most part of my career, first 20 years or so, I kept thinking, I'm this and I want to be that thing up. And then I'm this and I want to be that thing up. And I kept thinking I want the next job and I can do his job better than he can, kind of thing. That was my idea. And it made me ambitious and I got promoted and all that. But I remember finally hitting a level in a company, and I wasn't making like big money, but I had a good, solid, stable job that challenged me and was, a really good fit. But my boss traveled like 90% of his life. If you ask him, where are you based? He would say like Terminal D, LaGuardia, like for real. He's never, ever, ever home. And at that age, I was in my early 40s. I had 3 kids, then we had 4 kids, then we had 5 kids, all of which were young, right? 10, 12, 14, 16. And I remember thinking, man, now is not the time. And I so vividly remember being in a hotel lobby in Normandy, France with my boss at the time. And I had made 2 or 3 trips across the Atlantic in a couple of months. And I remember telling him, hey, Frederick, I can't do this forever. I can't be in France every few weeks. It's just not going to work. And I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the role. And then at one point, my new boss, we were sitting in Paris, France. This is about 7 or 8 months later. And my boss goes, Kent, on one of your very infrequent trips outside the state of Kentucky. And I just pointed and said, exactly. And we laughed about it because, I had almost an unlimited expense travel budget. Like they wouldn't have cared if I traveled anywhere in the world at the drop of a hat. I had a global job, but man, I didn't want to, right? I just felt the need to stay close to home, as close as I could. And man, I really commend your buddy for that patience, because I have felt the pull in both directions. I really have.
Yeah, 100%. Well, listen, I think this is a great topic. It's something that I would encourage dads to think about, pray about, read Nehemiah and kind of reflect, talk to your wife or, a friend and challenge yourself. Maybe think about a couple of things in your life that start small and you remember that God is going to be with you. So take a step out of your comfort zone. And I think Eric did just one heck of a job on this chapter. I got a lot out of it. And, the last thing I want to say is I love doing this with you. I get a lot out of it, like personally. I even get a lot out of re-listening to the episodes, and this book has done me a lot of good. But I am curious. I just want to say to everybody, I hope we are on to something here and kind of hitting the mark. And if you guys out there can let us know that, you can leave a review on iTunes or Spotify, and just, if there's something that you think we're missing, let us know. I mean, reviews help spread the word, and we want God to use this for his good. And that could mean that somebody else hears about it and it gets re-ranked and moved up, and then it's found by someone else. Help us do that, but also help us. I don't want to do this just because it's good for me and Kent, alone. Like, I'm hoping that you guys are getting something out of this. So I just want to, from the heart, ask, will you give us some feedback and help us discern what is hitting the mark in your lives with this podcast?
Love that. And I really appreciate you adding that, Lawson. Man, I'm with you. I don't want to just spit into the wind, right? As was that Jim Croce said, you don't spit into the wind. You don't tug on Superman's cape. Sorry. Old song. I really don't want to just throw stuff out there. And dads, if you're listening and you have any feedback for us, we'd love a review or rating, as well as I'll give you just real quick. If you're thinking about it, it's easy to remember. There's a generic email address that comes to me, comes to Hunter. We can field these emails with several of us on the team. It's info@manhoodjourney.org. It's info@manhoodjourney.org. If you have a comment about the podcast, give us a holler. Also on the podcast page, manhoodjourney.org/podcast, you can actually leave a voicemail. We got 2 more in the last couple of weeks, Lawson. I haven't listened to them, but I've seen them in our queue where we've had a couple of dads you can hit a button, Dad, and start talking. And then we're going to get that. And once a month or so, we'll review those and then might even drop you into a future Father on Purpose episode. So give us some feedback. Let us know how the show is helping you and what we could do to help you even more. We'll continue next week on our series as we step through our latest book, Bring Your Hammer, on the book of Nehemiah from the Bible. That's 28 tools dads can grab from the book of Nehemiah. We'll be on this for a few more weeks. And then after the Nehemiah series, we have already recorded a podcast with one of my spiritual heroes. Lawson mentioned him earlier. His name is Bob Russell, former pastor of Southeast Christian Church. Started it in a basement with 50 some odd people when he joined the church, and left it 40 years later in great shape with thousands of members, a godly man, grandfather, even now great-grandfather. So right after the Nehemiah series, stay tuned because we've got a really powerful interview with Bob Russell. That'll be in a few weeks. Dad, thanks for hanging out with us. Give us some feedback. Leave a review. Lawson, thanks for helping me out today, keeping us on track. You're a good man.
Thank you.
Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
You've been dozing off to the Father on Purpose podcast featuring Kent Evans and Lawson Brown. Now, wake up. Head over to fatheronpurpose.org for more tools that can help you be a godly, intentional, and not completely horrible dad. Remember, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose.